Pain arrived before consciousness. It always did. A sharp surge ripped through Lyra's arms, lightning forced directly into bone and nerve. Snapping her awake in a silent scream, she no longer had strength to release. Her wrists were locked high above her head, clamped inside thick metal restraints fused to a rusted wall. The current pulsed again, slow and deliberate, as if the system itself enjoyed the timing. Her muscles seized, toes barely touching the cold floor, shoulders burning until the sensation blurred into something worse than pain, numb despair. Beside her, Nyx jerked violently as her own restraints activated. The air filled with the faint crackle of electricity and the low hum of ancient machinery. The smell was constant, scorched metal, sweat, and something rotten that never quite faded. When the current finally cut, their bodies sagged forward, trembling, lungs gasping as if they had just surfaced from deep water. Above them, unseen speakers clicked, and a flat alien voice announced the start of another work cycle. The Karun called this Awakening for Lyra and Nyx. It was simply proof they were still alive, and that the day would demand payment in pain before it allowed them to breathe. They were dragged out into the open long before their bodies had recovered. Cold bit through torn fabric as the gates groaned apart, releasing them into the scrapyard. The world beyond the facility was a wasteland of metal corpses, towers of twisted beams, shattered hulls, and skeletal machines rose like grave markers under a sky permanently bruised with black smoke. Nothing grew here. Even the wind felt poisoned, carrying the bitter stench of burned iron and old oil that coated the throat with every breath. The ground was uneven, sharp with fragments that cut bare feet without drawing notice anymore. Lyra's eyes traced the endless fields of wreckage, remnants of forgotten wars, crushed ships, and half-melted weapons left to rot together. This place was not a yard. It was a cemetery, and the girls were forced to dig through it day after day. Overseer calls echoed from raised platforms, barking alloy codes and weight quotas. Failure was never explained. It was simply punished, with numb hands. Lyra and Nyx began lifting, sorting, and hauling, their small frames dwarfed by the ruins of machines once built by giants. Each piece they touched felt heavy with history, as if the dead world itself was watching, counting how long their fragile bodies could endure before joining the bones beneath the scrap. The beam was larger than anything they should have been assigned, its surface jagged and flaking with rust. Lyra braced her shoulder against it while Nyx pulled from the opposite side, their breaths coming in short, strained bursts. The metal groaned as it shifted, and for a heartbeat, it seemed to move. Then the ground screamed. A sharp crack split the air, followed by the thunderous collapse of scrap cascading down around them. The world vanished into choking dust and shrieking metal. Lyra was thrown backward, buried beneath smaller fragments, lungs burning as she clawed for air. Something heavy pinned her leg, something else pressed against her chest, making every breath a fight. Panic surged, raw and blinding, somewhere close. Nyx cried out once, then went silent. For a terrifying moment, Lyra thought she was alone under the dead weight of the scrapyard. The collapse stopped as suddenly as it began. Dust settled in thick waves, revealing a hollow where the debris had torn away. A massive shape lay exposed beside them, far too smooth and angular to be scrap. Plates of armored metal curved together with deliberate design, unbroken despite the impact. As Lyra dragged herself free, her heart hammered with a realization she barely dared to name. They hadn't uncovered junk. They had unearthed something buried on purpose, and something that felt like it had been waiting. Lyra stared at the exposed machine, her pulse thudding so hard it drowned out the distant overseer calls. The shape was unmistakable now that the dust had thinned. Layered armor plates fused at sharp angles, hydraulic joints thick as tree trunks, and a massive cranial housing partially crushed but intact. This was no scavenger drone or industrial hauler. Her breath caught as memory surged, vivid and unwanted. Nights on a cracked apartment floor. Her brother hunched over a battered table, carefully assembling a plastic model while explaining stories she barely understood. Old wars, lost worlds, machines built to stand where armies fell. "A titan," she whispered, the word tasting unreal. Nyx shook her head, eyes darting toward the watch platforms. "Don't say things like that. It's just metal. Everything here is metal." But Lyra had already moved closer, fingertips brushing the surface. The alloy was scarred, burned, ancient, but deliberate. Human. She traced a faded insignia half buried beneath rust, feeling something shift inside her chest, something dangerous and bright. This machine didn't belong in a grave. It belonged on a battlefield. And somehow, impossibly, it was still whole. Nyx grabbed her arm. "We don't have time." Lyra didn't pull away. For the first time since the chains closed around her wrists. She wasn't thinking about pain, quotas, or survival. She was thinking about purpose and the terrifying possibility that the scrapyard had just answered them back. Nyx dragged Lyra back toward the sorting lines, her grip tight and desperate. "You're thinking like it matters," she hissed, keeping her voice low. "Nothing here matters except quota. We stop. We hurt. We fail. We break. That thing is a death sentence." Lyra stumbled, but didn't argue at first. The overseer's silhouettes loomed above them, scanning the yard with cold precision. Every instinct Nyx had was shaped by punishment, by learning exactly how far fear could bend a body before it snapped. She had survived by obeying, by shrinking, by never believing in more than the next breath. Hope was dangerous. Hope got noticed. But as they worked, Lyra's eyes kept drifting back to the exposed shape, half buried in shadow. Each clang of metal against metal felt hollow, meaningless compared to what lay beneath the scrap. "If we keep doing this," she said quietly, "we don't live. We just last. And even that ends." Nyx's hands shook as she sorted alloy fragments. "Lasting is living," she snapped. Though the words sounded thin even to her, she imagined the agony rack, the electric surge, the way sleep vanished under pain. Fear tightened her chest, sharp and familiar. Lyra leaned closer. "Fear keeps us alive today," she whispered, "but it's killing us tomorrow." Nyx looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, fear wasn't the only thing staring back. They knew the moment the siren sounded. The tone was wrong, short, clipped, final. Quota failure. Guards descended before the sun had fully vanished behind the smoke-choked horizon, their armored boots splashing through pools of oil and ash. Lyra and Nyx were dragged back through the gates, wrists wrenched behind them, feet barely touching the ground. The facility swallowed them in metal echoes and cold light. The punishment chamber was already humming when they arrived. They were thrown against the rack, limbs forced into place, restraints locking with mechanical indifference. The first surge hit without warning. Electricity tore through Lyra's spine, arching her body violently as her breath shattered into a soundless cry. Pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was vast, filling everything, erasing thought. Nyx screamed once before her voice broke. The current pulsed again and again, measured, relentless. Agony rods pressed into muscle and bone, amplifying every surge until even time seemed to fracture. Minutes stretched into something endless. Sleep was impossible. Rest was denied. When the power finally cut, their bodies collapsed, twitching, minds hollowed out by suffering. In the darkness, as the chamber cooled, Lyra barely managed to whisper Nyx's name. There was no answer, only shallow breathing and the certainty that fear had kept them alive one more night. At a cost neither of them could survive forever. Morning came without mercy. Their bodies ached from the night before, muscles still trembling as they were herded back into the scrapyard. The overseers barked orders, but Lyra barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on the exposed head of the buried machine, half shadowed by scrap and soot. Every step toward it felt like crossing a line she could never uncross. When the guards turned away, she moved. Her fingers slipped beneath a warped seam, prying with everything she had. Metal shrieked softly, then gave way. The hatch resisted once more before opening just enough. Lyra squeezed through, heart pounding so loud she was sure it would give her away. Inside, the air was stale and cold, preserved like a sealed tomb. Dust coated everything. Panels, cables, it's built for giants. Dim light filtered in as her eyes adjusted. Rows of switches lined the walls, cracked screens frozen in darkness, thick control levers locked in place by time. This wasn't scrap. This was a cockpit. Lyra reached out, brushing her fingers across a faded console, feeling a strange warmth beneath the cold metal. Symbols she recognized from old books and lessons stared back at her. Human markings. Human logic. For the first time since her capture. She wasn't small. She wasn't powerless. She was inside a weapon. Behind her, the world of chains and quotas seemed distant. Fragile. If anyone saw her now, she would pay dearly. But as her hand hovered over the first switch, fear took a step back, and something dangerous stepped forward in its place. Lyra's fingers trembled as they hovered over the console. The switches were stiff, coated in dust and age. But their arrangement made sense in a way nothing in the scrapyard ever had. She chose one at random and forced it upward. For a breathless second. Nothing happened. Then a low vibration rolled through the cockpit. So faint, she wondered if she had imagined it. A soft whine followed, deep and mechanical, resonating through the Titan's skull. The central display flickered. Static crawled across the cracked screen before lines of pale text slowly formed. Each symbol burning brighter than the last. Initiating systems check. Lyra's heart slammed against her ribs. Green indicators appeared one by one. Power routing. Actuator response. Neural interface standby. The machine was alive. Not fully. Not yet. But listening. Outside. The scrapyard noise faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of something ancient stirring after a long sleep. Then the sequence stopped. A single line flashed, pulsing in warning amber. Stabilization control system. Failure. The vibration faded, leaving the cockpit silent once more. Lyra exhaled shakily, equal parts relief and terror flooding her chest. It hadn't rejected her. It hadn't died. It had simply waited. She pressed her palm against the console, feeling residual warmth beneath the metal. This wasn't a broken relic. It was a wounded one. And for the first time since she'd been enslaved, Lyra realized the machine wasn't the only thing that could still be fixed. Nyx nearly pulled Lyra out of the cockpit when she saw the open hatch. "Are you insane?" she whispered sharply, eyes darting toward the guard towers. "If they catch you in there, they'll kill you slowly." Lyra slid back down into the dust, breath unsteady, but eyes bright with something Nyx hadn't seen before. "It turned on," she said. "Not fully, but it's alive. It's missing one system. I saw it. Nyx shook her head, panic tightening her voice. We can't fix a war machine. We can barely survive a day. I know, Lyra said quietly. But we already aren't surviving. We're waiting to be broken. The words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Around them, the scrapyard groaned in the wind, metal scraping metal like distant thunder. Every rule they'd learned screamed that this was madness. Slaves did not plan. Children did not fight back. Lyra lowered her voice. We don't stop working. We don't draw attention. Just a little time each day. Minutes. If it fails. Nothing changes. If it works. She didn't finish. Nyx stared at the ground, then back at the Titan's shadow. Fear still lived in her bones. But something else had begun to grow beside it. Quiet. Stubborn defiance. If we do this, she said, there's no turning back. Lyra nodded. There never was. They clasped hands briefly, a silent agreement forged in dust and pain. Not hope. Not yet. Just a pact. To risk everything rather than disappear quietly into the scrapyard like the countless bones beneath their feet. They measured time in fear, not hours, not days. Just stolen moments between glances of the overseers and the weight of punishment waiting to fall. 20 minutes, never more. Lyra counted each breath in her head as they worked, knowing that a single second too long could cost them skin, sleep, or sanity. They hid their progress beneath chaos, dragging scrap aside as if by accident, carving narrow paths through unstable piles that no guard would bother to inspect. Nyx kept watch while Lyra dug, her small hands bleeding as she pulled away rusted plates and fractured beams. Every sound felt too loud. Every shift of metal threatened exposure. More than once. Nyx froze, whispering a warning as shadows passed overhead. The Titan revealed itself slowly, piece by piece, like a corpse refusing to stay buried. First, a massive shoulder joint, then sections of armored torso. Each discovery swallowed again beneath loose debris before they left. They never looked back when the work siren sounded. They never spoke of progress under the watchful eyes of the Karun. Punishment still came. Quotas were missed. Nights ended in pain. But the minutes they stole became something else, proof that time could belong to them. If only briefly. In those 20 minutes a day. The scrapyard stopped being a grave. It became a tunnel, leading somewhere dangerous, and possibly out. Pain stopped being an event and became a schedule. Nights blurred together, marked only by the hum of the chamber and the dull certainty that suffering would arrive on time. Some evenings, it was the rack. Arms wrenched high as current surged in measured waves. Other nights, it was the rods. Pressed. Held. Released, teaching their bodies to flinch before contact. The Karun never hurried. Routine was the point. Lyra learned how to breathe through it, shallow and controlled, hiding screams behind clenched teeth. Nyx learned where to let her muscles go limp so the spasms wouldn't tear something important. They spoke less afterward, conserving words the way they conserved strength. Bruises layered over old bruises. Burns healed just enough to burn again. Yet something changed beneath the repetition. The pain no longer erased the day. It sharpened it. As electricity faded, Lyra would picture the Titan's shoulder joint emerging from scrap. As rods lifted, Nyx would count bolts loosened, plates shifted, paths cleared. Punishment tried to reduce them to obedience, but it failed in a quieter way, by becoming predictable. When the lights dimmed and silence returned, they lay trembling, exhausted, alive. Routine had been meant to break them. Instead, It carved space inside their minds where fear no longer ruled alone. Pain still owned the nights, but the days, 20 stolen minutes at a time, were beginning to belong to something else. The final barrier gave way with a sound so deep and hollow it felt like a breath released from the earth itself. Beneath layers of scrap and collapsed plating, a broad armored panel emerged, curved and sealed, its edges fused by age, but untouched by corrosion. Lyra brushed dust from its surface, revealing a recessed outline and faded markings worn almost smooth by time. This wasn't structural armor, it was an access point. They worked faster now, urgency overriding caution. Nyx wedged a broken tool into the seam, while Lyra pulled with everything she had. Metal protested, then shifted. The hatch opened just enough to spill stale air and darkness into the scrapyard. Inside was a vast hollow, lined with conduits thick as limbs and cables bundled in disciplined rows, preserved like veins inside a giant's chest. Lyra climbed in first, boots scraping against inner plating. Dim emergency lights flickered to life as her weight triggered ancient sensors. The Titan's interior was quiet, purposeful, untouched by chaos. At the center rested a heavy rectangular housing, scorched and dented, stamped with human lettering half hidden beneath soot. Nyx followed, eyes wide. "That's it," she whispered. They didn't know what it did yet, only that they had reached the heart of something that had never truly died. Above them. The siren began to wail. Time was gone, but the Titan had opened itself to them, and it felt like a promise that couldn't be taken back. The housing was heavier than it looked. Lyra braced her feet against the inner plating, while Nyx pulled from the opposite side, their fingers slipping against scorched metal. With a final strained effort, the module tore free from its mounts, cables snapping loose with sharp metallic cracks. They nearly dropped it, catching the weight just in time and lowering it carefully onto the Titan's floor. Stamped into the casing were worn human letters, still legible beneath layers of soot. SCS, Stabilization Control System. Lyra's chest tightened. The warning message from the cockpit echoed in her mind. Suddenly real and tangible. This wasn't a random failure. This was the missing heart of the machine's balance. Without it, the Titan could wake, but never stand. They pried the casings open. Inside, the damage was immediate and brutal. Wires had fused together into brittle knots. Insulation was burned away, leaving blackened strands twisted like dead veins. A circuit board lay partially melted. One corner charred so deeply the original pathways were barely visible. Nyx swallowed hard. This didn't fail by age. No, Lyra agreed softly. It was hit. Whatever battle had buried the Titan here had wounded it deliberately, crippling it before it fell. The realization settled heavily between them. They weren't just repairing scrap. They were touching the remains of a war that had nearly erased this machine from existence. And now, impossibly, its survival depended on two children with no tools, no training, and no margin for error. They stared at the ruined circuitry in silence, the weight of it sinking deeper with every second. There were no tools beyond what they could steal or break. No solder, no proper cutters, no schematics. The Karoon had stripped the scrapyard clean of anything useful on purpose. Slaves were not meant to fix things, only to carry them until they collapsed. Nyx ran her fingers along the scorched board, careful not to cut herself on the brittle edges. "Even if we knew how," she murmured, "this would take days, weeks." Lyra glanced toward the open hatch, already listening for the siren. Days meant missed quotas. Missed quotas meant nights that never truly ended. Mercy was not something the Karoon offered for effort or intent. They punished outcomes, and the outcome here was failure waiting to happen. "We don't have days," Lyra said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "We have one chance, one window before they notice the digging, before the pain breaks us." Nyx closed her eyes, picturing the rack, the current, the way her body locked against its will. Fear rose sharp and familiar, but beneath it lay something colder now. Calculation. Survival had always been about endurance. This was about timing. They gathered fragments from their scrap piles, intact wire strands, small, unburned circuits, pieces no one would miss. If the repair failed, punishment would come regardless. If they succeeded, there was no guarantee of survival either. No tools, no mercy. Only a choice between slow erasure and immediate risk. Nyx met Lyra's gaze and nodded once. Whatever happened next, it would happen on their terms. Dawn crept in without color, a weak gray light filtering through smoke and scrap. Neither of them had slept. They sat inside the Titan's chest, knees drawn close, the ruined SCS module between them like a verdict. Outside. The yard stirred. Soon the siren would call them back to work. Soon the chance would be gone. Lyra broke the silence first. "If we walk away now," she said quietly, "this stays broken forever. So do we." Nyx swallowed, staring at her hands. They were cracked, blistered, stained black from metal and oil. These hands had learned how to endure pain, but not how to hope. "If we try," she said, "and it fails, they won't just hurt us. They'll make an example." Lyra nodded. She already knew. Fear pressed in from every side, heavy and familiar, but beneath it was something new. Clarity, the kind that only came when there was nothing left to lose. "Then we don't fail later," she said. "We fail now, or we don't." The siren wailed in the distance. Nyx closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw two futures. One endless line of days identical to the last, shrinking until nothing remained, and one moment of fire, risk, and choice. She opened her eyes again. "Do it," she said. They moved quickly then, stripping wire, cleaning the board with shaking fingers, splicing connections by instinct and memory, bending fragile metal into new paths. Dawn passed unnoticed as the choice became action, and fear, finally, lost its hold. They worked in silence, broken only by the scrape of wire against metal and the shallow rhythm of their breathing. Every movement had to matter. Lyra stripped insulation with her teeth, careful not to nick the fragile strands beneath, while Nyx straightened bent connectors against the Titan's inner plating. Their hands were small, but steady now, guided by necessity rather than fear. The circuit board was worse up close. Burn scars cut through printed pathways, leaving gaps where signals once flowed. Lyra traced the lines with her finger, reconstructing their logic from memory, lessons from forgotten classrooms, diagrams glimpsed long ago. "Power here," she murmured. "Feedback loop there." Nyx nodded, holding wires in place while Lyra threaded replacements through scorched holes, weaving new routes where old ones had died. They had no solder, so they twisted bare copper tight, reinforcing joints with fragments of insulation scavenged from elsewhere in the yard. Each connection was tested by touch, by feel, by instinct. A mistake here wouldn't just fail the repair, it could overload the system, burn the module completely, or kill them when power returned. Time pressed in on them from all sides. Overseer calls echoed faintly above. The siren would come again soon. But the work consumed them, narrowing the world to wires, paths, and fragile hope shaped by human ingenuity and scavenged ruin. By the time they reassembled the board, their fingers were raw and trembling. The repair wasn't elegant. It wasn't safe. But it was alive, born from scrap, stubbornness, and the refusal to accept that broken things had to stay broken. They had no manuals, no schematics to follow, only fragments of memory and a sense for how things should connect. Lyra closed her eyes at times, replaying half-remembered lessons about current flow and balance, while Nyx watched the board like a living thing, noticing patterns that felt wrong even when logic said they should work. Between them, instinct filled the gaps training never could. When a connection sparked faintly, Nyx pulled back instantly. "Too much load," she whispered. Lyra adjusted the path without hesitation, rerouting power through a thinner strand, trusting feel over certainty. They tested each change with care, brushing fingers near the wires, listening for the subtle hum that meant energy was moving, but not fighting itself. Their fear sharpened their senses. Every vibration mattered. Every shift in tone told a story. The Titan wasn't silent anymore. It responded, almost imperceptibly, to their work. A faint warmth spread through the module casing, not the dangerous heat of overload, but something steadier, stable. They weren't engineers. They were survivors, trained by pain to notice what others missed. Where formal knowledge ended, intuition took over, shaped by desperation and focus, piece by piece. The system began to make sense, not on paper, but in their hands. When they finally leaned back, exhausted, neither smiled. This wasn't triumph. It was recognition. They hadn't followed instructions. They had listened. And somehow, impossibly, the machine had listened back. The last cable lay across Lyra's palms like a living thing, heavier than it should have been. One end trembled faintly, carrying dormant power waiting to surge the moment it was seated. Around them, the Titan's chest hummed softly, a low, patient resonance that felt almost like breath. This was the point beyond fixing, beyond adjustment. Once connected, there would be no undoing what followed. Nyx steadied the housing, while Lyra aligned the connector by touch alone, guiding it into the scarred port millimeter by millimeter. Her fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second. Images flashed through her mind. Chains, quotas, the rack, the certainty of pain. Then she pushed. The connector locked in with a dull metallic click. For a heartbeat. Nothing happened. Then the module vibrated sharply, lights flickering along its surface in a slow, deliberate sequence. Heat spread, not wild or burning, but controlled, measured. The wires they had spliced glowed faintly before settling into steady darkness. The Titan responded with a deeper hum, resonating through the inner plating like a massive body shifting in sleep. Nyx exhaled shakily. It didn't blow. Lyra laughed once, breathless and disbelieving. They secured the casing, bolting it back into place with shaking hands as the warning siren began to wail overhead. Time slammed back into them all at once. They climbed out, sealing the hatch just as guards turned their way. The scrapyard swallowed the Titan again, silent and still. But beneath the rust and ash, something fundamental had changed. The final connection was made. Whether it would save them or destroy them was no longer a question they could take back. The moment came faster than either of them expected. As dusk bled into the scrapyard and shadows stretched long across the wreckage, Lyra slipped back into the cockpit, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Nyx followed, sealing the hatch with hands that would not stop shaking. Inside, the air felt different, charged, alert, no longer dead. Lyra flipped the same switch as before. The Titan answered immediately. The cockpit filled with a rising harmonic hum, deeper and stronger than anything they had heard before. Displays ignited one after another, washing the dark interior in pale blue and amber light. Lines of text streamed across the central screen, moving faster now. Confident. Initiating systems check. Green indicators appeared in rapid succession. Power routing, nominal. Actuators, responsive. Balance matrices, stabilizing. Lyra barely breathed as the final line approached. Stabilization control system, online. For a fraction of a second. The words remained, then resolved into a single message that made Nyx's knees weaken. All systems operational. The Titan shifted. Metal groaned far below them as massive joints engaged for the first time in years. Dust rained from the ceiling. The machine wasn't waking gently anymore. It was standing up. Vibrations rolled through the cockpit, controlled and deliberate, like restrained strength finally allowed to exist. Lyra gripped the console, eyes wide, laughter and fear colliding in her chest. "Nyx," she whispered, voice breaking. "It's listening." Outside, the ground began to tremble. For the first time since their capture, the world reacted to them, and not the other way around. The ground buckled as the Titan pushed against the weight of decades. Rusted plates sheared away from its frame, crashing down like rain made of metal. Lyra felt the movement through the controls before she saw it. The slow, inevitable transfer of mass as balance systems compensated, recalculated, and corrected in real time. This wasn't a broken relic forcing itself upright. This was a machine that knew how to stand. With a thunderous groan, one massive leg drove downward, hydraulic pistons screaming as they extended. The scrapyard shuddered. Piles of debris slid and collapsed outward as the Titan rose inch by inch, shrugging off the grave that had held it for so long. Nyx clutched the arm controls, knuckles white, as the cockpit tilted and leveled again, the stabilization system holding true. Light poured in through the forward viewport as the Titan cleared the scrap. 8 stories of armored steel emerged into the open, scarred but unbroken. Ancient insignias caught the fading sunlight, their lines dulled but unmistakably human. Smoke and dust swirled around the Titan's frame like a storm retreating from something it could no longer contain. Below them, alarms erupted. Karun soldiers scattered across the yard, their shouts sharp with disbelief. The Titan finished rising and locked into a full upright stance, towering over the ruins. The vibrations settled into a steady, powerful stillness. Lyra swallowed hard. "It's not buried anymore," she said. Nyx stared out at the shrinking world beneath them. "Neither are we." The Titan stood fully revealed, no longer scrap, no longer forgotten. And in its shadow, fear changed sides. The scrapyard erupted into chaos. Karun soldiers poured from the facility in disorganized waves, their feline silhouettes darting between piles of wreckage as alarms screamed overhead. Orders overlapped, contradictory and sharp with panic. None of them had been trained for this. The Titan was supposed to be dead, another husk stripped for parts. Another human ghost buried under rust. From the cockpit, Lyra saw how small they were. Pulse rifles fired almost immediately. Blue-white bolts streaked upward, striking the Titan's legs and torso in scattered flashes. The impacts left little more than scorched marks, shallow burns that faded as heat dispersed across layered armor. The realization spread through the ranks below like poison. Their weapons didn't matter. Nyx flinched at the first impacts, then steadied as the control feedback remained calm, unwavering. "They can't hurt it," she said, disbelief sharpening into something close to awe. Heavy units rushed forward, dragging mounted cannons into position. One fired. The shot detonated against the Titan's chest in a bloom of light and smoke that cleared to reveal nothing. No breach. No crack, just steel that refused to yield. The overseer emerged onto an elevated platform, shouting commands with a voice already breaking. His tail lashed in fury as he stared up at the impossible, 2 enslaved children inside a machine built to end wars. Below, panic became movement without purpose. Soldiers ran, others froze. Some dropped their weapons entirely. Inside the cockpit, Lyra felt it then. A shift not in the machine, but in the world itself. The fear that had ruled their lives was no longer aimed at them. It was aimed upward. The controls fought back at first. Nyx's hands jerked as the joysticks resisted her instincts, translating small movements into forces meant for giants. The Titan's arm twitched, then stilled, awaiting clearer intent. Warning indicators flickered. Not alarms. Guidance. This machine didn't need orders shouted at it. It needed to be understood. "Slow," Lyra said, forcing her own breathing to steady. "It feels what you do." Nyx adjusted, easing pressure instead of forcing it. The Titan's arm lifted smoothly, joints aligning with controlled precision. Feedback flowed through the grips, subtle resistance, balance cues, limits whispered through vibration. Nyx's fear sharpened into focus. She wasn't fighting the machine anymore. She was learning its language. A targeting reticle bloomed across the forward display as Lyra brushed a weapons toggle. The system responded instantly, cycling through dormant arsenals, calibrating angles. Outside, soldiers scattered as the Titan's shadow shifted. Nyx swallowed. "I don't want to miss." "You won't," Lyra said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. Nyx squeezed the trigger halfway. The Titan's arm tracked, adjusted, compensated for wind, mass, and distance. When she pressed fully, energy surged, but held, waiting for confirmation. The machine trusted its pilot as much as its pilot trusted it. They weren't warriors, not yet. But in that moment, surrounded by steel and fear, learning replaced panic. Every second at the controls rewrote who they were. They had been taught how to endure. Now, they were learning how to fight. The first shot tore the air apart. A concentrated bolt of white-blue energy erupted from the Titan's arm, slamming into the outer wall of the facility. Metal vaporized on impact, the explosion punching a smoldering crater straight through reinforced plating. The shockwave rippled outward, scattering Karun soldiers like debris. For a heartbeat, the yard fell silent. Then chaos roared back twice as loud. Nyx barely had time to react before Lyra was calling out target markers, instinct guiding her hands across the console. The Titan pivoted with terrifying grace, each step calculated, each movement heavy enough to bend the ground beneath it. Another bolt fired, then another. Towers collapsed, storage bins ruptured, spilling molten wreckage and flame. "Lower," Nyx muttered, adjusting her aim as the reticle locked. She fired again. The shot punched through the torture wing, detonating inside with a sound like the sky breaking. Walls folded inward. Power conduits flared and died. Smoke poured from shattered corridors where screams had once echoed. "Just crush it," Nyx said, voice shaking, not with fear, but fury. The Titan advanced. One massive step reduced barricades to scrap. A sweeping arm smashed into the central structure, caving it in with brutal finality. The facility buckled, collapsed, and burned, its control towers sinking into themselves as if the ground were swallowing them in shame. From above, Lyra watched the place of chains and pain vanish beneath fire and steel. The Titan stood amid the destruction, immovable, unstoppable. The Karun had built the facility to break children. Now, it was burning because of them. The overseer watched the ruin unfold from his elevated platform, claws gripping the rail hard enough to bend it. Smoke rolled upward, carrying the echoes of collapsing steel and shattered command lines. Everything he had built, every system of control, every carefully measured cruelty, was coming apart in minutes. And at the center of it all stood the Titan, silent now, looming like judgment made solid. He barked orders into his comm, voice sharp with fury. Units were to regroup, heavy weapons were to advance, discipline was to be restored. But the words no longer carried weight. Soldiers hesitated. Some turned away entirely, eyes fixed not on their commander, but on the massive machine that had rendered them meaningless. The overseer stepped forward, pulse rifle raised, firing wildly at the Titan's chest. The shots scattered harmlessly, leaving only faint scorch marks. The realization hit him then. Cold and absolute, authority meant nothing without fear. And fear had changed sides. From the cockpit, Nix saw him clearly, small, rigid, suddenly alone. "He's running," she said softly. The overseer turned and fled, tail tucked, leaping from the platform and disappearing into the wreckage. No one followed him. No one obeyed. The yard had fallen silent, broken not by force alone, but by the collapse of belief. Lyra watched the empty platform through the viewport, heart pounding. "That's it," she whispered. The Titan stood unmoving amid the flames, and below it, an empire built on pain ended, not with a final command, but with a single figure running from the truth he could no longer control. The warning arrived without drama, a quiet line of text cutting through the glow of victory. Reactor level, 15 Pro. Lyra's smile faltered as the number pulsed, amber edging toward red. "Nix," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're losing power." The Titan took another step, crushing a metal bin beneath its heel. But the movement felt heavier now, slower. Systems compensated, rerouted, shed non-essential functions. Displays dimmed slightly, as if the machine itself were drawing a careful breath. Nix tightened her grip. "Can we shut weapons down? Save it?" Lyra's hands flew across the console, toggling systems off one by one. Targeting grids vanished. External lights powered down. The hum beneath their feet dropped in pitch, deeper and strained. Outside, the fires still burned, but the Titan's presence began to feel finite, no longer endless, no longer unstoppable. The number fell, 8%. A low chime sounded. Not an alarm, but a warning shaped like restraint. The Titan slowed to a halt, bracing itself automatically. Balance locked. Joints stiffened. The machine chose stability over movement, survival over dominance. Then, with a soft descending tone, the lights went out. Silence rushed in, thick and complete. No hum, no vibration, just the faint crackle of distant flames and the sound of their own breathing inside a cockpit gone dark. Nix swallowed hard. "Did we lose?" Lyra pressed her palm to the dead console, heart racing. Outside, they were surrounded by enemies. Inside, 10 inches of iron sealed them away. "No," she said quietly. "We ran out of time." The Titan stood frozen amid the wreckage, its power spent, its work unfinished, and its pilots waiting to learn what the world would do next. Darkness settled slowly, pressing in from every side. Without power, the cockpit felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the Titan itself had gone still to listen. Lyra and Nix sat strapped in, knees drawn close, surrounded by silent screens and lifeless controls. 10 inches of armor wrapped around them, thick enough to stop weapons, thin enough to trap fear inside. Outside. Sounds returned in fragments. Distant shouts, metal scraping against steel as Karun soldiers climbed the Titan's legs, testing, probing. Something struck the hull, once, twice, followed by frustrated snarls when nothing gave. The machine did not answer them. It stood like a statue, unyielding. Nyx leaned her head against the seat, eyes closed. Her hand still remembered the weight of the controls, the way the Titan had moved when it trusted her. Now there was nothing to do but wait. Waiting was familiar. Waiting had been their life. But this time felt different. The pain was absent. No current surged through their bodies. No orders came. Hours stretched. Night fell fully, cooling the metal around them. Eventually, the noises outside faded. The Karun gave up, retreating from what they could not open, could not punish, could not understand. In the silence, Lyra reached out and took Nyx's hand. It was warm, real. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "they can't put it back the way it was." Nyx nodded, eyes opening in the dark. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled alone. Inside the iron shell of a dead war machine, they waited for morning, not as slaves bracing for pain, but as survivors holding ground they had already claimed. Dawn revealed the truth without mercy. Pale light crept across the scrapyard, cutting through smoke and settling on the Titan like a verdict. Lyra peered through the forward viewport and felt her stomach tighten. They were no longer alone. A ring of armored vehicles encircled them. Heavy treads dug into the ash. Turrets tracked the Titan's chest with deliberate precision. Above, a shuttle hovered low, its weapon ports open and waiting. "They didn't leave," Nyx murmured. Figures moved below, disciplined this time. Not panicked soldiers, but hardened units advancing in practiced formation. The overseer stepped forward, flanked by guards, his voice amplified across the yard. He demanded surrender, promised mercy he had never once given. The words sounded rehearsed, empty. Lyra's hands curled into fists. The Titan remained dark and unresponsive, a silent giant surrounded by teeth. She imagined the hatches forced open, imagined chains closing again around her wrists, the weight of it pressed down, familiar and suffocating. Nyx leaned back against the seat, eyes shut. "We did everything we could," she said softly. It wasn't defeat in her voice, only acceptance. Outside, targeting systems whined as weapons locked. Time narrowed to a thin, fragile line. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world was deciding whether their moment of defiance had been a miracle or merely a delay. Then something changed. The light dimmed, not from smoke, but shadow. A vast, unnatural shadow sweeping across the yard from above. Soldiers froze. The overseer looked up, and for the first time since dawn, fear returned to the ground below. But it was no longer theirs. The sky broke open. What had been a flat, smoke-choked gray folded inward. Light bending around an impossible mass, descending through the clouds. Engines roared, not the sharp scream of Karun craft, but a deep, controlled thunder that vibrated through the Titan's hull and into Lyra's chest. The shadow expanded, swallowing the yard, the tanks, the overseer's platform, until the ground itself seemed to shrink beneath it. A human dreadnought emerged from the cloud cover, vast and deliberate, its armored spine lined with glowing drives and weapon banks that dwarfed anything the Karun had ever fielded. Symbols burned along its hull, clean, unmistakable human markings. The air pressure shifted as if the planet itself were bracing. Below, formation shattered. Tanks reversed blindly, Soldiers scattered, weapons lowering as panic tore through discipline. The overseer stumbled back, staring upward, his authority evaporating in the presence of something that did not need to shout. From the dreadnought's underside, smaller craft detached and fell in precise arcs, stabilizing just above the ground. A voice rolled across the scrapyard, calm and absolute, amplified by systems older and stronger than fear. "Unknown Titan pilots," it said. "This is Human Expeditionary Command. Hold position. Evacuation is inbound." Inside the dark cockpit, Lyra felt her breath catch. Nyx laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. The Titan remained powerless, but it no longer mattered. The war had found them, and this time, it had come home. The hatches opened with a hiss of pressure release, cold air flooding into the cockpit. Lyra squinted against sudden light as a ladder extended upward, boots echoing against metal. Human soldiers emerged first, armored, cautious, weapons raised out of habit rather than intent. Their movements slowed when they saw who waited inside. 2 children, small, filthy, wrapped in torn fabric barely worthy of clothing, bruises layered over burns, wrists marked by old restraints. For a long moment, no one spoke. The soldiers' training faltered, replaced by something raw and unguarded. "Medic," a voice said sharply. Then, softer, disbelieving. "They're kids." Nyx tried to stand and nearly collapsed. A soldier caught her instantly, lowering his weapon and supporting her weight as if afraid she might break. Another knelt in front of Lyra, visor retracting to reveal stunned human eyes. "You piloted this?" he asked, glancing back at the Titan towering behind them. Lyra nodded once. "They made us work here," she said hoarsely. "The machine was buried. We fixed it." The words spread fast, through comms, through ranks, through the waiting dreadnought above. Slaves, children. A reactivated Titan signal traced back not to an army, but to 2 survivors who refused to die quietly. Orders shifted instantly, weapons lowered. Medics rushed forward, wrapping blankets, checking pulses, whispering reassurances that sounded unreal after years of cruelty. As Lyra was guided down onto solid ground, she looked back at the Titan one last time. It had been a weapon, but it had also been their voice. And now, finally, someone had listened. The medical bay was brighter than anything Lyra remembered. Clean light, steady and warm, without the hum of pain or the smell of burned metal. Soft restraints, nothing like chains, kept her still as scanners passed over her body, reading injuries, mapping scars left behind by years that should never have existed. Nyx lay on the next bed, wrapped in white fabric, eyes wide as if afraid the room might vanish if she blinked. Outside the viewport, the dreadnought pulled away from the planet. The scrapyard world shrank into a scarred sphere of smoke and rust, then vanished as the ship entered hyperspace. Stars stretched into brilliant lines of light, rushing past like something being torn open. "It's really over," Nyx whispered, her voice unsteady. Lyra nodded, unable to speak. The weight she'd carried for so long. Fear, pain, the certainty of tomorrow's suffering, began to lift, leaving something fragile in its place. Relief hurt almost as much as the chains once had. A medic smiled gently, adjusting a blanket. "You're safe," she said. "You're home now." Home. The word felt strange, unfinished. But as the stars blurred and the ship carried them farther from the world that had tried to erase them, Lyra felt something settle inside her chest. They were no longer cargo, no longer tools, no longer slaves. Nyx turned her head and smiled. Small. Real. Unafraid. "Did you see him run?" she said softly. Lyra laughed, the sound surprising them both. Beyond the hull, the stars burned endlessly, and for the first time in their lives, the future was not a threat waiting to happen, but a vast, open sky. Finally, theirs to choose.